All right, welcome back to the broadcast, ladies and gentlemen. This is hour number 3, and I think we now have on the line Linda Kurtz. She is with the Smart Meter Education Fund here in Michigan. Linda, do you hear me?
I can, and I'm with the Smart Meter Education Network.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. Well, thank you for joining us, however belatedly. I don't know what's going on with the phone bridge. I guess if this continues to be a problem, we may end up having to do something a little different here. But you've been involved in this fight here in Michigan against these smart meters, and I just wanted to get a little background here from you. How did you come to take on this battle, I guess?
Well, I had never even heard of a smart meter, and I got an email from someone in, I think it was April, might have been May of 2012, and someone I didn't know well, and but I read the email for some reason, and she said that a smart meter had been put on her apartment building, and ever since it had been, she had become extremely ill. And I thought, well, you know, there's a possibility that that could happen to me, because I'd had a client the year before who told me he was EMF sensitive, that he couldn't use a computer anymore. He was a college student. He couldn't use a cell phone. He couldn't watch TV. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then a month later, I got a laptop computer, and I was really excited, like, oh, I can go outside and be on the Internet. And within half an hour of being on that thing, I was so sick, nauseous, just felt absolutely horrible. And so I made the connection, and I called the computer store, and they said, well, you know, turn off the Wi-Fi. I did that. It helped a little bit, and I had to physically take out the wireless chip in that. So I knew there was a possibility, and about a week later, I walked into somebody's home in Ann Arbor, where I live, home I'd never been to before, and I felt unbelievably ill. It was like being in a B movie and just having all these things hurtling at you. Mm-hmm. And I said, do you have a smart meter? And she said, I don't know. And I went outside and I looked, and there were 3 on the wall of the kitchen, which is the room that I was in. So at that point, I knew I was sensitive. I got a letter from DTE, our electric company, about, probably a week after that, and I made up a 4-page flyer. I passed out over 200 of them in my neighborhood, and then about a week later, I saw a sign on the bulletin board at the People's Food Co-op that said, lock your meter. Don't let DTE install the smart meter. And I went and got a lock. And then somebody gave a talk, and I stood up and said, anybody who wants to organize against this, meet up with me afterwards. And so that's how the Smart Meter Education Network started.
Yeah, and you're in contact with people all over the state. Mm-hmm. How many people have kind of jumped on board, to your knowledge?
Well, I can't really say how many. I mean, we have around 2,000 people on our newsletter list.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So, and there's a lot of people who are, you know, keyed in through people who forward the newsletter or other groups, different political groups. And there's a lot of people who will call me, like, you know, 3 years after their area's been installed, and said, you know, oh, you know, I've still got my analog meter, and DTE is starting to hassle me. So there's an awful lot of people out there.
Yeah. Now, you're talking to people all across the country right now in different states, and the thing that I want to stress is that just because we may be talking about Michigan, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about applies to people in every state, because this is being rolled out. Actually, it's being rolled out, you know, internationally. I don't know if you were aware of that or not. Yeah. But this is a part of a much greater effort. In fact, I was just reading last night, strangely enough, that over in Britain, there is the British. There's a gas company, British Gas. They're actually, believe it or not, offering people now free electricity if they will take the smart meter. So it seems, and other people have criticized this whole thing as being a big scam, which it does seem, you know, nothing's ever really free. But it looks like there's desperation going on to get these things rolled out, because there seems to be, you know, with networks like yours and other people that are involved in the opposition to these things, it seems to be a real backlash. And the power companies, and the whole smart grid apparatus seems to really pulling out all the stops to try to manipulate people into taking this. Has that been your experience?
They start off and nobody knows about them, and so they get a lot of them installed. And what seems to happen is that, after about 4 years, more and more people start realizing what's going on, or they come to their neighborhood and suddenly they're ready to fight. They weren't ready to jump on board until it was at their back door.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there is also some desperation on their part. I mean, the truth of the matter is most people don't care if a smart meter's on their home. Most people don't feel it, and therefore it's hard to imagine when you can't feel something or you don't feel the effects of it that it really is going to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes difficult to make people, even close friends of mine, understand what's going on. Now, DTE, so the electric company in the eastern part of Michigan, they don't call them smart meters. They have never used the word. They call them advanced meters. And you can be pretty sure that happened because in California, people, again, didn't know about the smart meters, but people were getting meters put on their home and they were getting sick and they didn't understand why. And so the smart meters got a bad name. So by the time DTE was going to roll them out, they called them advanced meters. And so people get a letter in the mail that says, we're upgrading your electric meter, it's going to be really great for you. And, or they call it an AMI meter, but the word smart meter is never used. So that in itself creates confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting thing is that last week, DTE sent a newsletter to all of its employees, doesn't matter what division they're in, doesn't matter what they're due, telling them how to talk to people about the smart meters. That speaks to me of desperation.
Yeah. Well, that's a big pat on your back. That's the closest thing to recognition of your efforts that you'll ever get from the other side. You mentioned health issues, and I want to come back to that for just a moment because apparently a lot of people have felt this, and I don't want to just focus on the health things because there's also privacy issues as well, which is a big deal. I mean, a really big deal that people really need to pay attention to. But I wonder what all kinds of effects have people been feeling from these things?
There's a lot of different things people feel. Some of the most common ones are insomnia, ringing in the ears, heart palpitations, anxiety, irritability, outbursts of anger, increases in blood sugar levels, increases in blood pressure levels. Children often get nosebleeds. They become hyperactive, and they're getting slammed by Wi-Fi in the schools, too. So, it's really becomes a problem for them. Other things that people experience are dizziness, balance problems. People will find that their jaw is extremely clenched. Some people, when they lie down in bed, they literally cannot get up in the morning. It's like they're paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
And this would sound really crazy, but I've heard it, from enough people that it's really something that's happening. And it may be because the bed springs are picking up the current and feeding it into their body. So most people have more than one reaction. I mean, I've got multiple things going on. One of the more down the road things that is happening to me is cataracts.
Wow.
And gingivitis. So the eyes and the testes are two parts of the body that can get even more affected than other parts or have more degradation happen to them because they're so filled with fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And the EMFs, one of the things the electromagnetic fields do is cause a lot of free radicals to form in the body. And those are the things that you want to take antioxidants for. Eat those, colorful fruits and vegetables. And when you can't clear that out quickly enough, it just causes all kinds of problems in the body. Cataracts can be part of that. Floaters can be part of that. So gingivitis, another thing you'd never think would happen from those. And there's research papers, on this. I mean, it's not just, my personal experience or that of other people. I mean, people have studied this kind of thing.
Yeah, and these are studies that we're not going to hear about, apparently, because there is, a big problem, and everything seems to come back to money. Everything seems to come, it's like the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, certainly, truer words couldn't be spoken, because we have everything in society really boils down to somebody's agenda being paid off, and somebody's profit-making scheme having to be furthered, and so the truth has to be suppressed. And it doesn't matter about the public health. We've got all this Wi-Fi technology around today. People with cell phones, many of these carriers operating on the microwave or near the microwave frequencies, and so people are voluntarily radiating themselves every single day, and it's something that's almost impossible to be without. Even if you make the decision not to have a cell phone, you'd be hard-pressed to find a payphone. At one point, if you needed to use a phone and you were away from home, you could find a payphone and do it, but you almost have to have a phone of some kind now, because there are no payphones anymore, or if there are, they're in a neighborhood you wouldn't want to be. So,
well, or what I do is, if I have to make a call when I'm somewhere, I simply go in somewhere and say, "Can I use your phone?" Or I ask somebody to, occasionally make a call, but I can't even be near the cell phone. So, I mean, it's not even an option for me.
Right.
And that's one of the things that happens when you're hypersensitive to these electromagnetic fields. Now, they're going to affect everybody down the road, but when you're hypersensitive to them, you become affected by more and more things, and it becomes very difficult to live. I can't even spend time outside of my own house anymore because I got a cell tower 1,000 feet away from me.
Yeah, wow.
And that had already affected my sleep, although I didn't realize why I wasn't sleeping well. Then they put the smart meters in, and things went over the roof, and I just couldn't sleep anymore. My body's adjusted a bit so that I'm, sleeping a little better, unless I spend 15, 20 minutes outside on my own property, and I can't sleep all night. And that's what happened to me yesterday. I didn't sleep all night last night.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So it's something, it's like, it's like your home is supposed to be your castle.
Mm-hmm.
And yet these frequencies are going through your home. The electric, you have no control over your neighbors, Wi-Fi blasting into your home. The electric company wants to put a meter on your house that is going to bombard you not only with radio frequency, but the dirty electricity that goes through the home wiring. And, according to them, you don't have an option.
Yeah. Well, and there seems to be a disconnect among the average person who doesn't suffer the effects, at least knowingly, the health effects of these meters and these newer technologies, these Wi-Fi radiation. A disconnect between, many people don't either turn a blind eye to the fates of those who do. There's just not a recognition, or they just think it's all in their head, because, well, I don't have a problem, so, maybe you're just imagining all these things.
Right.
And that there's another problem, but then you turn the corner. I guess what I was saying a moment ago, though, is that I think we've come to a point where, like you pointed out, it's almost impossible. Really, if you're going out in public, it is impossible to avoid this kind of radiation, the increases in this stuff, because it's everywhere. It's in every public place now, and in most private places. So the only thing you can just about do is try your best to eliminate exposure. And that even goes for people who have the devices. To try, most people are sleeping with cell phones next to them, just a foot or two away, and the whole time they're sleeping, they're radiating themselves with RF. It's just really remarkable. I'm afraid we're headed for a public health catastrophe in the future. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing about the radio frequency, the wireless frequencies that the smart meters put out, the cell phones put out, and so on, is that they affect so many different systems in the body. So let me just take 1 minute to explain one part of that. So one of the things that happens is that when the radio frequencies or the frequencies from the dirty electricity hit your body, they knock calcium ions off your cell membrane. Those are charged particles. And when they do that, your body is flooded with calcium in places the calcium shouldn't be. One of the things that happens is calcium is a neurotransmitter. It helps the nerves to make their signals. So you can't sleep at night because your brain is flooded with calcium in the synaptic spaces, the spaces between the nerves. You're getting heart palpitations. Well, part of that can be because there's calcium firing in your heart, telling your heart to do this, to do that, and it's very erratic. The muscle cramping, the same kind of thing. The calcium being leached out of where it's supposed to be will enter the cell and cause all kinds of enzymatic reactions. And enzymes are what actually do so much of the work in our body. They make so many bodily processes happen. So it can start telling your body to do things when it's not supposed to. Oh, make this hormone. Don't make this hormone. Oh, your blood sugar levels go up. Different things like that. So, at first it would seem like, how could all these... When I first got into this, right, I didn't know anything, and there was very little information on the Internet. And I was even skeptical and thought, well, how could, all these different reactions that people are claiming, really? And then they started happening to me. But then I also started reading about why such a wide variety of health effects can be caused by the effect on one simple, molecule, the calcium molecule.
Yeah. Well, one thing that strikes me as rather ironic is, we back in the 80s when I grew up, we had, I remember when microwaves first came on the scene, and, microwave ovens. And that was a military-style technology that was brought into the mainstream, like so many of these other things, including the Internet, by the way, developed by the Internet and ultimately adapted for consumer use. And, the microwave, is something that had, basically it's a Faraday cage. You can put your cell phone in the microwave. Don't turn the microwave on, of course, but call your cell phone. It's not supposed to ring because that thing is reinforced, and that's what that screen is when you look through the front window of the microwave is a part of the Faraday, cage apparatus to keep the signals from going in or leaving. And so we that was reinforced in such a way to try to keep people from having radiation, microwave frequency, spilling out onto you and giving you cancer and stuff. Now we've turned around, and the microwaves are still reinforced, but we get all this other technology that's doing the very thing that the microwave oven Faraday cage was supposed to prevent. It's really remarkable.
Right. And another thing that's interesting is that, for instance, Salzburg, Austria has limits for radio frequency radiation that are thousands of times lower than the United States. Russia has lower limits. China has lower limits. The European countries have lower limits than what we have here. France has banned Wi-Fi from their public schools because they are seeing the effects. And what the limits are in the United States is, this was done to protect radar operators back in the 1960s because they were getting ill, and it became very obvious. If the radio frequency radiation emitted will heat up the tissue, the flesh of a 6'2" tall man, 220 pounds, and it will heat it up in a half-hour period, then it's too high. If it heats it up in 29, it's not too high. It was designed for a one-time exposure. They didn't look to see what about the biological effects of the stuff that I was already talking about. So the safety limits are not safety limits. Right.
Well, let's turn a corner here if we can and talk a little bit about what the privacy ramifications, because we can get into, we were talking earlier about the the health ramifications, and we could talk about studies. You said earlier there were studies that were done, and of course, every time any study is done on anything, it's being suppressed by the industry. And what it looks to me like is we're having a whole industry being built up around these technologies to the point where there's a profit motive involved that is designed to crush any kind of exposure, any kind of objective study, anything that is designed to make this thing look bad so people won't adopt it. Can we address a little bit about the privacy ramifications of the smart meters and what that means for the average individual?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I'm not as well informed about that. But one of the things is that we've already had two former CIA directors say the smart grid will be used to spy on Americans. So I think that's enough to tell you that there's some privacy ramifications. The NSA has used smart meter data. In Ohio, one of the things that has happened with smart meters is that law enforcement has subpoenaed data from the electric company, and somebody's usage is very, very high. And they say, oh, these people must be growing marijuana illegally. And so one guy had a SWAT team in his door.
Wow.
No notice, SWAT team in his door, beat his door down. He had a lot of computers in his house.
Wow.
Yeah. So, this feeling of a lack of safety. Another part about it, and I think, look, the electric companies are doing this for a variety of reasons. To make money, to satisfy the government with its mandates about, which may be well-intentioned, but with its mandates about, electrical usage, because one area of the country or a state is producing a lot of electricity, another doesn't have enough, they can shunt it around when they have a digital meter, because they can, I don't know why, but they can tell better what's going on. But then the other reason is the profit motive.
Yeah.
So the chip manufacturers are making a ton of money off of this stuff. They want it to keep on going. But the electric companies are seeing the benefit of this data gathering. So a smart meter in Michigan right now gathers your data and sends it to the electric company in 15-minute increments. That doesn't mean that's how often it's pulsing. It's pulsing constantly. But every 15 minutes worth of usage is transmitted. They can tell when you go to bed, when you get up, when you started using a lot of stuff, how many people are in the home.
Yeah.
If they want to program it for 1-minute intervals, they can do that. When they do that, they can get really fine-grained data on what you're doing. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, government agency, and the study was done some time back, looked at smart meters and said they are a real problem for privacy. And here's the kind of data they can gather. And the other thing that you have is that a smart meter not only has the transmitter that transmits to the utility, and that also the utility can transmit to you. It has a Zigbee transmitter in it. And a Zigbee is a device that communicates into the home with all of the smart appliances. And smart appliances...
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry. We have the bottom of the hour break. And then
sure.
We'll continue on the other side of the break. Okay, folks, we're visiting with Linda Kurtz of the Michigan Smart Meter Education Network. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the broadcast. This is Govern America, final half hour of the show here today. And we're visiting with Linda Kurtz, who's with the Smart Meter Education Network. And you can get to her website, by the way, by going to www.smartmetereducationnetwork.com. That's smartmetereducationnetwork.com. As we were talking about smart meters and probably the smart grid as well, we were discussing some of the health ramifications associated with the smart meters, and we've kind of turned a corner and got into some of the privacy ramifications as well, as Linda has been doing her research regarding the studies involved, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, the statements they've made about the data that can be gathered. We know that the NSA has become a huge problem to our freedoms and our rights to privacy and what have you, the ability to be secure and in our persons, as the Fourth Amendment recognizes our right to do that. And so the point is, ladies and gentlemen, in a day and age where corporations and government is increasingly hostile to our freedoms and our privacy, do we want to have these things invading our homes? And that's the problem. And, Linda, welcome back from the break. I don't know if you remember what you were saying just before we went into the break.
Yeah, I do, and I think I have my thoughts gathered a little better now.
Very good.
And that was actually a good segue, what you just said. So the smart meter also has a Zigbee transmitter on it, and that communicates with the smart appliances in your home. So if you buy new appliances, most of them are going to have a smart chip in them. It's a wireless chip. It's emitting all the time. It's another source of great damage to health. The other thing is that information can tell the electric company what kind of appliance you have, not just whether it's a toaster or a washing machine, when it's running, what cycle it's using, and what brand it is. Now, some people say they don't care very much about the privacy issues. That's fine. It's everybody's personal opinion on that. But here's the thing. That data is going to be sold.
Yep.
And when it's sold, it's going to be used for people to advertise to you. Now, your personal data isn't going to be sold. It's going to be aggregated data, a zip code, a neighborhood, a street, whatever it might be. One of the executives of CenterPoint Energy, I think it was, said recently on a video that you can find on the internet, he said the data is going to be worth more than the electricity that we sell. We got to find a way to mine that data.
Yeah.
So this is what they're looking at. They're looking at selling your data. Advertising influences people in ways that we do not even think about and do not even realize. So this is another method for control. Because if you think about government and corporations being in bed together, it kind of ends up being the same thing. Government, corporation, somebody's controlling you.
Yeah, you're singing our song. I'll tell you what, we've been moving as a society toward a totalitarian system where corporations are really empowered tremendously, and you're right, you can't really tell where government control ends and corporation. Basically, they're all in bed together. And this is a big problem. We're seeing this smart meter thing emerge, and there's really a whole smart grid system. And we talk a lot about on this broadcast about how basically everything seems to be boiling down to automating society. Basically, designing systems that are such that everything can be fully automated and be brought down to maximum efficiency so that it can be managed from the top down. And we're seeing this with the emergence of robotics and everything, and I know I'm kind of deviating a little bit, but it's all really interconnected in a big way. So this privacy issue is a big issue, and to me, it's a big issue even outside of the smart meter system, because I've had Patrick Wood on of the he used to be of the August Forecast. He has a website called technocracy.news where he writes and posts articles about these emergence of this technocratic system, whereby everything basically we're becoming slaves to machines and to electronic technology. And what I asked him at one point, what about this? Why can't we just fight this battle with the smart meters on the issue of the health issue alone? Because there's enough people that are being affected by this. He says, well, it's a real issue, but the problem is that their answer might end up being, okay, we won't put a smart meter on your house. We'll just collect all the data via an Ethernet cable. And I thought, oh, okay, so there's other ways to be it. So we have to incorporate the privacy thing. But what does it take to make people actually get it, number one, and then if they get it, to make them care? If they can understand it, to make them actually concerned enough to actually act on that concern.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I hope, everybody listening to this broadcast is asking themselves, because it is so easy to get overwhelmed by so many things. But, smart meters, whoever cared about the meter on the side of your home? Whoever thought about the meter on the side of your home? And yet, as we're seeing, as you're saying, we got the health, we got the privacy, we got control. You're looking at everything, and if they cut your power off, it's pretty difficult to live in this society without power anymore.
Yeah.
So, in terms of things that people can do, in Michigan, we do have a bill in the State House. It's the Analog Meter Choice Bill, House Bill 4916, and it is languishing right now because the chair of the Energy Committee isn't interested in it. He's going to become an energy lobbyist when he gets out. But people writing to their state legislators, telling them that they care about this bill, because the legislators do listen, and we are finding more of them coming on board and being willing to support this bill as they get educated and as they understand that it's a question of choice. So, You don't care about the health issues. You're not concerned about the privacy issues. But you feel like people ought to have a choice. Mm-hmm. And if I have an analog meter on my home, the old style of meter that I do still have on my home, DTE is still getting its electric reading. So what's the difference? There is no difference. They say, well, we'll put on a smart meter with the radio transmitter disabled. You're going to be fine. Well, you're not, because the health problems are still the same. They can still collect all the data, which is why they want to put it on.
And this is what they call the opt-out meter, right?
Yeah. It's a complete misnomer.
What's the difference between a so-called opt-out meter versus the regular smart meter? You said that they say that it's just supposedly the one has the transmitter turned off. So the smart meter comes with the radio transmitter and the Zigbee. And what you are supposed to get if you get their opt-out meter is a smart meter with those two functions disabled. However, we know for a fact that they're not always turning them off. We've had electrical engineers out measuring them transmitting. And I don't know that they're doing it deliberately. I think sometimes they just don't do what they're supposed to do. So that's the difference between the two. And then the opt-out meter, the difference between the opt-out meter and the analog meter is, and this holds for the smart meter too, is the dirty electricity. So what you have, when you've got a computer as a meter, you have to step the voltage coming in from the power line down, and you have to step it back up to run everything in your home. And the process of doing that creates dirty electricity, which is this very spiky field. It's pulsing in millisecond bursts. It runs through your wiring of your home. It's above you, it's below you, it's all around you, it's radiating out into the room, and it is hitting your cells in millisecond bursts. So people who have an opt-out meter on their home are getting just as sick as people with the regular smart meter. No problem for the electric company to leave the meter on. It's cheaper for them. They refuse to do it. And that in and of itself tells you there's a larger agenda going on, in my opinion. Yeah. Now, and there's another issue involved here, too, and that is not only, assuming we could trust the power companies, the corporations that are involved there, and everything, in the government. How is this data being transmitted? Do you know if it's encrypted when it goes through? And if so, how strong of an encryption is it? And what are the chances of hacking? Because we know that, in our society, even a former Homeland Security Secretary has warned. In fact, Ted Koppel, we've talked about this before many times on the broadcast, about how Ted Koppel has a new book out called Lights Out, where he's talking about how the power grid could be, hacked and brought down. And he says it's not a matter of if, but when. An outgoing Homeland Security Secretary, Janet Napolitano, made a warning, too, in that regard, that the nation's power grid could be vulnerable to hacking and that sort of thing. These are real issues. I mean, so could it be that these could possibly be maybe an entry point for some rogue state or rogue group or individual that might want to cause damage?
From what I understand, yes, it could be. Again, I don't know a lot about this part because it gets pretty technical, but the bandwidth that they use is unregulated, and apparently they're using it because they don't have to pay anything for it. But it also means that anybody else can be hopping onto it. The grid was hacked in Puerto Rico a few years ago. It was hacked in the Ukraine either early this year or late last year. And I think that brought out some of those people making those comments that you were just talking about. So, and there's bills here and there in different legislatures, about encryption and privacy and so on and so forth. I don't know that any of them have ever been passed. But, yeah, it's definitely vulnerable.
Yeah, and you talk about other environmental hazards. Do you know anything about, the effects of these things possibly on bee populations or, animals? I mean, certainly if it was affecting human health, it would be affecting, the health of a lot of different, especially when you're talking blanketing whole neighborhoods and large chunks of land with this electromagnetic frequency.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One is, they're noticing how the frog populations are declining, and they're declining in places that are far away from any chemicals. And my suspicion is it does have to do with all the radio frequency in the air. At my own house, when the cell phone tower went up, unbeknownst to me because it was hidden by trees, all of a sudden the insect population went down. And, I'd been living here for a few years, and I'm like, where are all the dragonflies? Where are all the bugs? Well, about, more than 10 years later, the smart meters came in, and it was just a complete and total crash. I mean, you do not see any bees. Used to not walk through my yard barefoot. Big deal if I do now. Almost no butterflies. Almost no dragonflies. Fireflies seem to be doing okay. Spiders seem to be doing okay. But many insects navigate via magnetism. And when you put out these frequencies, these are electromagnetic frequencies, they mess it up. They have done studies on bees and cell phone frequencies disrupting their ability to navigate. And I think we're seeing it, and people just aren't noticing it.
Yeah. Well, and then you have the other issue that many of these things have caused fires and explosions. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. DTE claims that there have been no no fires, no explosions from their smart meters. A woman in Ann Arbor actually called us up shortly after the meters were installed here and said, my meter exploded. She was on the TV news. There have been some other houses in the Detroit area that have burned up from the smart meters. They hush a lot of this stuff up.
Sure.
Interestingly, when I went to look for those TV and, online newspaper stories from 2012, 2013, they were all gone. They disappeared. They took them off. So, DTE got to somebody. Now, DTE put out its own bulletin saying that, in fact, meters have exploded and telling its meter readers to look out for them. And yet it tells the state legislature that there have been no fires. And what you have in Saskatchewan province in Canada is a lot of fires to the point where the the state decided to remove all of the smart meters. Now they're putting new ones back in, but they got rid of those ones. Portland, Oregon, same thing. In Nevada, there were a series of fires. At least one woman was killed. And one of the electric utility employees, see, my brain, sometimes these cell phone frequencies go through my house, and then I begin to have some difficulty thinking, and that's what's happening right now.
That's okay.
So I apologize for that.
No, that's okay.
One of the utility company employees went to the newspapers, turned to whistleblower, and said, "Here's what happens. We know there's a fire because the meter, isn't transmitting anymore. We get out there before the fire department. We take the meter off. We put a new one on. We spray paint the wall, and we leave, and nobody ever thinks about it."
Wow, that's incredible. I remember back when they first came out with the smart meters, because, we've been focusing primarily on electricity, but they were, we're talking about also water meters and gas meters as well. And, so what everything you're saying here regarding electromagnetic radiation and privacy, for one, you might as well multiply that by 3 for most homes. Now out here where I'm at, we don't have, thankfully, meters on our well and that sort of thing yet. There have been parts of the country where they've tried to meter wells and actually have done so. But we have a propane tank here. But most homes are going to have 3 of these things, or 2 at least.
Or 4 if they have the interruptible air conditioning.
The interruptible air conditioning?
Yeah, so you get a separate meter so that if they want to, they can turn off your air conditioning, like people voluntarily do that. Like one of my neighbors has two electric meters.
Huh. Yeah. Okay, I didn't realize that took 2 meters.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, they used to do it with the analog. I mean, I don't know how they did it, but they did it. But now they've decided they got to have a smart meter for that, too.
Wow.
Yeah, you're getting radiated with all this stuff. And we've had some people call who've only had the gas meter put on because they don't put them on at the same time and have been having terrible problems. The water meter's the same thing. One guy in Inkster told us, my blood pressure and my blood sugar went through the roof. He said, it's always been really well regulated, and I go to my doctor and he says, "Oh my gosh, this is really out of whack. What's going on?" Like, nothing's changed. And then we came to give a talk on the smart meters, and he said, he got our flyer, and he brought it to his doctor, and he said, "Could this be what's happening?" And it was right when the meter got put on that these problems began happening. And that's what you see over and over again. People will call me, that have been living with terrible health problems for 3 years, and they call up just, in tears or outraged and say, "You know what? I have been suffering. I have been to the ER. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I found out about the smart meters. All my symptoms match up. I call the electric company. I find out when the meter was put on. It's exactly when these problems started happening."
Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about the strategies, what we should be focused on doing, because I can tell you right now, I know of a particular guy who's a listener who's in Missouri. He's a blind man. He's living in an apartment, basically a condo, and he doesn't have control over his meter. Basically, the complex that owns the building does. And he's asked me a number of times whenever we've talked about this on the show, he says, "Can you get some of the guests that you have on to address what somebody like me maybe could do to shield this radiation out?" Because he says, "I know it's coming." Right now, I guess they have the analog meters. He says, "I know they're going to be rolling these things out here in the apartment as well." And he says, "There was really not a whole lot I can do to stop it, other than maybe to try to convince them. But the management, I guess, that he would be talking to, they're just employees. They don't really have any real power other than to, enforce whatever policies that the higher-ups say." So really you're dealing with, again, in his case, a faceless, bureaucracy. So he's left with the need to be able to try to figure out a way on a personal level to try to mitigate some of the risks involved. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, there's a couple things. And, the apartment complex probably doesn't have any power anyway because, just like here, I know in Missouri they're just forcing them down people's throats there, too.
Right.
There is a woman, though, there is a group in Missouri, but I don't know the name of it. It's probably Missouri, Missouri Against Smart Meters or something. So he might try and find that out. But yeah, so in terms of trying to mitigate or remediate, one problem you have in an apartment complex is, everybody's probably got Wi-Fi, so you've got that going through. There's a couple of things. Okay, so one thing that you can do to block the radio frequency if your utility will not let you opt out. Okay, so at least, if you have a digital meter, at least you can opt out, hopefully, depending on where you are, and get that radio frequency turned off, and I recommend that everybody do that. You can buy or make a smart meter guard, which is basically stainless steel or aluminum mesh. You could make it with window screen, and it will block, a fair bit of the radio frequency. On the inside of your house or your apartment, the wall where the meter is, you would want to put either some aluminum screening, or even better, you can put that UV window film, the reflective UV window film, and you would just stick it to the wall, and it will, anything that's coming in, it will reflect it off so that it goes back outside. You can put that on your windows. If you have aluminum siding on your home, you're much better off. I do have aluminum siding and aluminum window screens, so the readings in my home are much lower than outside, but they're still not so good. Now, as far as the dirty electricity goes, you can put a filter on the meter. It would attach to the circuit breakers, and you will filter out the dirty electricity. This is actually something that I've just gotten into selling after doing some investigation, obviously, for my own reasons. And they do work, and people do find relief from their symptoms. If you're in an apartment building, it would still be a good thing to do, but it's not going to work as well there or a condo because the adjoining walls, of your other neighbors are still going to be carrying that dirty electricity. Any amount that you can tamp it down is going to help, though.
Yeah. Very good. So, aside from the legislative aspects, so we talked about the Michigan Analog Choice Bill, and you said that was HB 4916?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we have information on our website under opt-out legislation. And we also, our website covers a lot of stuff, and we do have stuff about other states. So if people look through, it's not going to be as comprehensive, but they will find some information about opt-outs in other states.
Okay, sounds very good. So here's a solution, ladies and gentlemen, as everybody's always saying, you complain about the problem, we need solutions. You got to focus, again, on your state legislature and your cities, because this is where the battles are being largely fought. And you can certainly do something about the smart meter rollout on a state level. So this is what I encourage people to do. Look at the model legislation on the Smart Meter Education Network's website. smartmetereducationnetwork.com is the website. smartmetereducationnetwork.com. And if you live in Michigan, as I do, HB 4916, HB 4916, Michigan Analog Choice Bill. And I encourage people in other states to look up the bill as well and take that to your state legislator and say, hey, we need to do something like that here, because this is a very important issue. Linda, we're just about out of the hour already. It's been a very fast hour. I appreciate you coming on with us.
Yeah, well, thank you. And can I just mention, we do have a newsletter. People in Michigan, please do go to our website. Please sign up, because this is going to be a tough battle. We can win, and everyone everywhere, start educating people. Get some facts and start educating, because the more people hear it, the more they will begin to listen.
All right. Hey, thank you very much. We'll have to do it again. God bless. All right, folks, that's smartmetereducationnetwork.com. That's smartmetereducationnetwork.com. And pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it, and join us back here next week, folks. God bless. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.